Hello viewers, today we are going to discuss what is known as the sociology of everyday life. It is a relatively new discipline which emerged in the latter half of the 20th century. In this lecture, we are going to look at what is everyday life, what is third sociology, because we take it from Piotr Stomka, who considered sociology of everyday life to be the third sociology. What is the distinctiveness of third sociology or the sociology of everyday life? And the last portion will be dealing with how to do a sociology of everyday life. What is everyday life? Stomka calls sociology of everyday life as the third sociology. He identifies, therefore, two other sociologies that preceded the sociology of everyday life: the first sociology and the second sociology. The first sociology dealt with social wholes, that is, organisms and social wholes and structures in the tradition of our classical thinkers like Comte, Spencer, Durkheim, Marx. The second sociology dealt with social actors or social atoms, which was in the tradition of another great classical sociologist, Max Weber. Both of these, Stomka considered, were to be reductionist approaches. How is it reductionist? First sociology engages in upward reduction of social life. That is, it treated social life as the manifestation of systemic or structural determinants. Second sociology treats social life, Stomka argues, as aggregates of behaviors or actions, thereby engaging in downward reductionism. Third sociology, or the sociology of everyday life, rejects both these reductionisms. To quote a lengthy one from Stomka, the idea of social existence focuses on what really occurs in human society at the level between structures and actions, where the constraints of structures and the dynamics of actions produce the real, experienced and observable social events, the social individual praxis making up everyday life. Stompa continues that in the notion of social event, the agential or the personal input of acting individuals and the structural or the situational context within which they act are brought together in one undivided phenomenon. Thus, sociology moved away from two illusions of common sense. One is doing away with what he calls the arrogant and egocentric belief in our individual autonomy, importance, exceptional quality, and independence from the rest of society. Similarly, it also rejects the opposite of this tendency, that is, the fatalistic and resigned belief that our fate is entirely shaped by invisible, superhuman, and uncontrollable forces. Third sociology, according to Stomka, paints a more realistic picture. It embraces both the limits of our freedom from, due to our unavoidable embeddedness in the net of relations with other people who happen to be free too, and the opportunities for creative participation in the life of society, or our freedom to, due to our unique location in wider social constellations with other people who may be influenced by our actions. So one is the freedom from our embeddedness, that is unavoidable, because we live in a society and we live among people in a network of relations. And the other one is freedom too, because we are, again, to an extent, unique individuals in society. Okay? And then there are these people who may be influenced by our actions, like we were influenced by the network of relations in the earlier point. So, social existence is intrinsically dynamic in both routine reproductions and in social processes which are transformative. Stomka develops the notion of social existence and social becoming into a dynamic model because it is processual, it is always in a process of transformation. Social existence and social becoming therefore capture the reality better. He claims social existence and social becoming form the ontologically basic and prior level in any human society. Third sociology is concerned with the analysis, typology, and theoretical explanation of this level of reality. What are the methods that we use? Qualitative methods, very distinctively qualitative methods, which include observation and photography. They form the very basis of researching everyday life. So, visual sociology is also again an offshoot of this kind of third sociology. There is the shift towards third sociology. How does this shift occur? Third sociology, or the sociology of everyday life, emerged out of three theoretical tendencies that appeared from around the mid-20th century. There was a critique of abstract sociological systems. That abstraction, the critique of that is already there in our critique of classical sociologies, but primarily it was a critique of Parsons' structural functionalism. And that was the first one when it in its turn led to three directions. What was it? One, there was a subjectivist turn towards the study of intentions, motivations, and reasons behind social actions. One was Goffman's dramaturgy that epitomized it. Second was an agential turn towards the study of social actors and the ways in which they create and construct social structures, organizations, etc. Third is a cultural turn toward the search for the subtle, underlying basis of meanings, rules, values, and habits of the heart, within quotes, regulating human conduct. So, all these were represented or epitomized by one was Goffman, as we mentioned, his dramaturgy, Harold Garfinkel, his ethnomethodological approach, and the phenomenological approaches of Peter Berger and Luckman. That was the first trend. Second was the postmodern critique. The first was the critique of these abstractions, particularly of Parsons. Okay, so we move on to the second one. The postmodern critique of earlier sociology that focused on features that were considered neglected by sociology because it considered on wholes or on individuals. That is fragmentation, contingency, risk, bodily, emotional, and self-reflexive character, globalization, among several others. This was the second tendency. The third direction was provided by feminist theory. It was indeed very critical. Feminist theory was searching for roots and reasons of oppression and exploitation of women in the everyday life, particularly in the family and in the workplace. All these forms part of our very familiar spaces of interaction. So these new intellectual developments reflected the new phenomena that was emerging in society. We now turn to the ontological premises of third sociology. Stomka proposes conceptual tools and distinctions for third sociology to develop into a theoretical and methodological orientation. That particular tool is the concept of social existence. What is it again? That the social world is nothing other than an interpersonal field, an interhuman space filled with encounters, contacts, interactions, relationships, social bonds, ties that cover the whole spectrum, from love and intimacy to interests and contracts, from cooperation to competition, from consensus to quarrel, from peace to war. You would recollect that when we studied George Simmel, Simmel was in his dialectical method bringing in all these opposites, saying that social life, or sociation as he called the process of being in society, that without these opposites there could be no association, that they cohabited, they lived together. So every relationship, every human relationship consisted of all these opposites. So social existence here, that is Stamka's concept, captures the social world as therefore an interpersonal field which are filled from an entire spectrum. It covers the whole spectrum. So this embeddedness of human beings in the relationships with other human beings occurs where? Best in our everyday experiences. Our own everyday life is what we are living as social beings as well. It is the central social aspect of our existence as humans, our everyday experience. Therefore, everyday life appears as the area where social existence manifests itself best, and therefore what can be a more ideal site for sociological research other than everyday life. And everyday life for so long, as Stamka claims, had been neglected, the study of it, because it was considered to be routine, so mundane that nobody really took notice of it. So what are the defining features of everyday life? Everyday life, again from Stamka, is the observable manifestation of social existence. It therefore always occurs in a social context. Even when we are alone, others are virtually present in our thoughts. We may even dream about them. We do recall their presence. So what Stamka says is that we conduct internal conversations, which then becomes crucial for shaping our motivations and actions. Everyday life events are repeated. They are not unique. Sometimes they are even cyclical, rhythmic, turning into routines. They occur every day, routinely, day after day, month after month, or at certain fixed moments during the year. Birthday celebrations, let's say, Christmas celebrations, or your regular going to the workplace, or attending some functions. Everyday life assumes ritual, dramatized, stylized forms, following certain unreflexive, deeply internalized scripts. For example, habitual actions typify this. So deeply internalized that we do not often recognize this. But an observation of these events can help us research everyday life better. It can bring to light this kind of internalized scripts that we follow on an everyday basis. So one is habitual actions typify this, but in the case of more solemn occasions such as religious ceremonies, this becomes more obvious. When you are performing a religious ceremony, we follow scripts that we have very clearly internalized. It's unreflexive. Everyday life engages our body, biological endowment, physical prowess and emotion with all its strength and frailties, its possible potential and its limitations. So a focus on the body, and that has been the contribution, as we have pointed out, a very important contribution of feminist theory in this, that body came to be seen as very central to the very doing of a sociology of everyday life. So therefore, Stomka says that the body is a crucial aspect of what constitutes everyday life. Again from him, everyday life is usually located in space, localized in space. It occurs at certain locations, for example, home, school, street, church, workplace. The character of the site significantly determines the character, style, form, and content of social events. That's very much obvious. Episodes of everyday life have a certain temporal duration. They may last for a shorter time or longer. They may also have different structurally expected durations. So the actual or expected length significantly influences, Stomka says, the character of a social event. Finally, from Stomka, the last defining feature of everyday life is that everyday life often flows unreflexively, following habits and routines of which the actors are not fully aware. So, it is this routinized life. Nothing dramatic seems to happen. But it's very mundane, it will go on its own. It's like that, those habits and routines. And they follow unreflexively. And precisely because it is like that, it is important to research this type. How do we do a sociology through everyday life? Stomka makes it very clear to all of us that sociology of everyday life is not a new discipline or subfield of sociology. It is a new perspective, an angle of vision that allows us to see all issues of sociology in a new light. It does not replace the first and second sociologies. It never intended to do so. It said it shifted, it moved away from certain aspects of first and second sociologies which were problematic and which neglected the study of everyday life. So the sociology of everyday life proposes to add to the study of social events at the most real, obvious, and banal level of everyday life, to the analysis of complex abstractions, social systems, structures, and social actions. Abstractions find their embodiment and realization in the episodes of everyday life. So it's an embodiment that we are studying. The abstractions then find their embodiment and their full realization in what we live in our everyday life. In their book, Johnston, Keynes, and Bauman, the book is called Introducing Sociology Using the Stuff of Everyday Life. You would notice that it doesn't appear to be a very strictly academic language when we write stuff of everyday life instead of, let's say, saying components of everyday life. That is very deliberate. So that book is written by Johnston, Keynes, and Bauman. They connect in that book sociological thinking with the stuff again. They insist on using the word stuff of everyday life. What is that stuff that they use in this instance, in this book? Cars, clothing, fast food, entertainment, the kind of films you watch, the kind of music you listen to, like that. So the remaining part of this lecture today will be based on these, explicating and examining these connections that Johnston and others lay out in their book. While discussing sociological thinking and making a critical distinction of the same from the close cousin of sociology, common sense, Zygmunt Bauman brings in a core sociological aspect, which he called defamiliarizing the familiar. To make the familiar, the routine, the everyday that is so taken for granted appear as unfamiliar, as strange. That is the first important step towards developing a qualitatively new form of thinking, that is sociological thinking. If you'd recall, we had studied Bauman and also C. Wright Mills, who in his sociological imagination has done the same thing, connecting what appears to be our individual, private troubles to larger public issues. And he focuses on those individual troubles, which would seem peculiar to individuals perhaps, but which are actually embedded in the larger structures and relations. Peter Berger, when he introduced the 5 motives of presuppositions of sociology, he called this the same thing, that it's a methodological posture. Debunking. What does debunking do? Debunking, again, it's you need to debunk because it's too familiar to you. You break it, you debunk it, you make it unfamiliar, you make it strange. That is when you start questioning, which otherwise would not ever have happened. So Johnston and others also underscore the significance of seeing, quote, the strangeness of the familiar stuff in their everyday lives. The jeans they wear to class, the coffee they drink each morning, or the phones their professors tell them to put away during lectures. You see, everyday things, right? Very common. What is there? What's so sociological about it? We'll see through the explication of one such example, which is we shall focus on food, particularly fast food, and that we consume, and we can then help you to defamiliarize this everyday routine aspect of our lives. A variety of examples on and around food are given that Johnston and others say, besides pointing to our own individualities, also allow us to see the larger picture and therefore scope for sociological thinking. Why? What we eat, what do we like to eat, is something occurring at an individual level. It may define me as a person. But is it only that? When we start questioning that by again making it appear strange, we then dig deeper and see that it speaks to a larger focus. What is that? The food we can consume cannot be separated, they say, from our material cultural contexts. We may be, through food, consuming a part of our culture. Or, I'll say, by consuming a particular kind of food, eating a particular kind of food that is prohibited by our culture, we can be defying that culture. So we'll take here the example of a hamburger from the book by Johnston, Keynes, and Bauman. The hamburger may be an individual choice for someone, say X. But does this hamburger help us to see a larger picture connected to individual styles of consumption? We are not moving away. We are not denying the individuality. That's what Johnston's saying, that we are not moving away from that. But even though they are connected to individual styles of consumption, can we paint a larger picture? And we can. It is connected to an individual's personality and to a larger culture of consumer choice. But, as Johnston and others say, it is also connected to some processes which are social and ecological and which are deeply troubling. Let's see now. Let's make it appear strange, the hamburger that we have. Many hamburgers, what is the source of the hamburger? So they say that many hamburgers are the result of industrial livestock production. Often called factory farming, industrial livestock operations are associated with a range of concerns such as environmental degradation caused by manure runoff into waterways, as well as the ethical implications of raising animals in confined operations. But are there also something beyond these? Investigators, it's from the book Using the Stuff of Everyday Life that I'm taking, have found out that if the hamburgers production were to be kept in mind, concerns about carbon production and associated climate change, and also of obesity, hamburgers would not cost so less as it does. So it's essentially harmful for us. And how do we understand that? When we research this apparently routine, mundane form of consumption that we do, or many of us do, almost every day, hamburgers. They are also associated with human health concerns, we quote, such as the impact of antibiotics and hormones on children's physical development and the threat of the bacteria called E. coli. Media has focused consistently on the health of human consumers and not on the health concerns of workers who handle the meat before it reaches us as hamburgers. How do they reach us? There are specifically human beings engaged in its production, right from sourcing the meat, right? Do we have any concerns for them? No. Why? This is what we would focus on primarily. It may come as a surprise if we look at the concerns of workers, their health concerns. So the workers who are working on farms and in the meat production plants face health risks in addition to potentially unsafe and exploitative working conditions. The lack of media attention on workers' health and working conditions can again be seen through the lens of class. Who owns the corporate media? The media owners belong to the high-ranking classes, and therefore they may not be concerned with the issues of workers' health. There is also the issue of hunger and the challenge of feeding a growing population. Do we keep on producing meat and all these, or do we grow food crops to feed the hungry? So, taking the statistics from Johnston, here's what they say, that thinking sociologically about food, an everyday affair, draws our attention to vast levels of inequality at a local and global scale. An estimated 842 million people worldwide struggle with chronic hunger and malnutrition, 827 million of whom live in the global south, that is, countries like ours, that is, the lesser developed countries. But the issue of food insecurity, that is, not having consistent access to affordable, healthy, culturally appropriate food, is also a serious social problem within the world's richest countries. So imagine what can happen to the world's poor and the poorest countries. They also talk about poorer households, and where they spoke to women. It is not only a problem of a less balanced diet or not being able to give proper measures of food, but this was a problem they researched and found among women in particular. Women, among them mothers, felt particularly guilty that they were not able to provide their children with a minimum balanced diet. I think this points again to the patriarchal system and the values it promotes. Guilt of not being able to provide adequate nutrition in the domestic sphere, which is identified because of patriarchy, not because of anything to do with the natural abilities of women, but because of patriarchy. They are associated with the domestic sphere. And therefore, everything associated with that sphere becomes the burden of women. And there, it is they who experience guilt. So even when we are talking about this and food and lack of adequate food in many parts of the world, we can again connect with the macro structures of gender and patriarchy when we do something of an everyday kind like food, when we are dealing with that kind of an item. I hope this lecture has been illuminating to you. Thank you very much.